It was never just about the feds or President Trump or the Justice Center. That's why the protests rage on, far from downtown.
And we not stopping because Black Lives Matter.
And now, a black woman who became a household name after the Max stabbings is front and center again after police arrest her at last night's protest. Last week, we learned that in Oregon, dying from COVID and dying with COVID is counted the same way. So, how about in Washington? And why it seems that some people appear to care less as more people die.
At some level, we may not feel anything.
Here's the story.
Hey, hello everybody. I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to The Story. It is a new day, a new week. Based on science, though, I can't tell you time is still moving forward. It's stagnant and we're moving forward. Look, time's relative. My point is, it's Monday. Let's do what we do. Let's talk about the news. Reach out to us. Tell me what you want to see us cover for you. Email me at thestory@kgw.com. Search for Dan Haggerty on Facebook or Instagram. Hop on Twitter and use the hashtag HeyDan. Time is a flat circle. Let's start the show. And let's jump right into the big story tonight and the protests, which haven't stopped, even though the feds did pull back. In fact, after 70 plus nights, they seem, some would say, even more intense now than they ever have, and they're not just downtown. And once again, Portland is back in the national spotlight under the national microscope because of this. National media is reporting on us still. The White House is talking about us again. And national leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement are in town lending their support to the activists. And something happened over the weekend that caught the eye of the Washington Post. Local activist Demetria Hester was arrested overnight. If you're thinking, I know that name, Demetria Hester, where have I heard that before? Well, we've mentioned it several times, many, in fact, right here on this show. She's the woman who was harassed and assaulted by Jeremy Christian the night before he killed two men aboard a Max train in 2017. The update tonight is that Hester will not be prosecuted. Multnomah County's new DA, Mike Schmidt, isn't pursuing the case. But keep in mind, dozens more were arrested this weekend. Maggie Vespa takes us through it.
And you folks have inspired people across the country because they tried to break you.
International, national, and local leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement held a news conference in downtown Portland today. Front and center, Demetria Hester.
And we not stopping because Black Lives Matter.
Hester was harassed and assaulted by Jeremy Christian just a day before Christian went on to kill two men aboard a Max train in 2017. Last night, Portland police arrested her at a protest.
This is happening all over the world, so jump on board with the unity, with the love.
KGW confirmed late today the Multnomah County District Attorney will not be prosecuting Hester. Her charges are expected to be dismissed. A spokesperson for the office couldn't give details about the dozens of others arrested over the weekend. Most are facing charges of disorderly conduct and interfering with a peace officer. Today's public showing came after a weekend of, at times, fires and destruction. The protests, once staples of downtown, have moved mainly to North Portland. Saturday night, our cameras rolled as a group of people set a fire inside a dumpster and set up barricades in the street. Another video shows a small fire burning inside the Portland Police Association headquarters on North Lombard. Similar scenes played out Sunday. Portland police say multiple officers were injured throughout the weekend. They said people are firing mortars, throwing chunks of concrete, and launching commercial-grade fireworks at them. Night after night, police quickly declared these gatherings riots and used tear gas to break up crowds. The chaos, again, drawing the attention of the Trump administration.
And what we're seeing in Portland with 6 nights in a row, riots being declared.
Today, the White House press secretary took aim at Mayor Ted Wheeler, hammering him for standing with protesters last month as federal officers sprayed the crowd with tear gas, only to condemn violence amid the movement last week after police said a group of people tried to light a precinct on fire with officers inside.
It is a drastic change. It took him 73 days, I suppose, to come up with that realization.
Mayor Wheeler declined to comment.
Just heard them yelling and breaking things.
It was violent.
Meanwhile, people in North Portland's Kenton neighborhood are cleaning up damage.
Could have been worse, but the whole point of it is that, that stuff costs money. When we come into the place to where we're in a pandemic currently and we're trying to do the best we can as a community, these kind of things can take a toll on some people if we're not careful.
Okay, Maggie Vespa joining us now. Maggie, let's talk a little bit about these charges being dropped, which wasn't really a huge surprise considering we have spoken to Mike Schmidt on several occasions. He's the Multnomah County District Attorney, just elected on a very progressive platform. He had said that he didn't intend to pursue charges against protesters unless they were very extreme cases.
Exactly. And his office confirmed that that was going to be the case with Demetria Hester late today. And, frankly, it's safe to say that that information very plausibly came out because the media was just asking about Demetria Hester's case more than the others. We know her from the Christian trial, and then she's been at these protests every single night. You heard her voice was hoarse in that piece. According to multiple reports, and this is something we want to point out, Hester was arrested last night when things were pretty calm. Police, according to those reports, just kind of walked in and arrested her. Police have told us that they've done that in past cases, because they're arresting people for things that they believe those people did on previous nights, and they didn't want to arrest people when things were chaotic because they thought that would be rather incendiary. So they kind of wait until they have a chance amid some calm circumstances, and then they do that. That said, I kind of want to pull back the curtain on how we find out about these arrests, because basically, as it happens, on the morning after each protest, we've gotten press releases from the Portland Police Bureau that basically explain in general what happened the night before, what the crowd did the night before, and then they'll say, these are the people we arrested, and then there's just a list of names, ages, where the person lives, and what the charges against them are, along with their mugshot. It doesn't say specifically what police are accusing that person of doing, what the circumstances were. That's a long-winded way of saying we don't know what the rationale was for arresting Hester. We have asked the DA's office for the rationale for dropping her charges or declining to prosecute her charges, and because of that, it's believed that the court will dismiss those. We haven't heard back yet. But Dan, as you said, Mike Schmidt ran on a really progressive platform, and he said in interviews that he believes these cases are also just frankly hard to win because while it's easy to tell a jury what a crowd did, it's hard to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that a person who was wearing black and a mask, just like everybody else at that protest, did this one individual thing and should be found guilty of it. So again, we asked about all of the rest of the cases, all those arrested over the weekend, dozens of people. We haven't heard back about their individual cases, but it would not be surprising at all to hear that Schmidt's office is declining to prosecute a number of those cases or all of those cases. But again, that is just one possible outcome. We are still waiting on the info and the answer from his office. We'll let you know when we get it.
Interesting context, Maggie. Thank you. Now, here on The Story, we like to share local journalism that we think is worth your time. And today, it's from OPB's show Think Out Loud. They talked to Ken Cuccinelli, who is the second most powerful person in the Department of Homeland Security, and they had a lot of questions about the federal presence during the downtown protests.
According to many assessments, the protests were losing steam when the federal surge happened. Why did many more federal officers come when they did in early July?
Yeah, those weren't assessments. That was a narrative. And the reason additional officers were sent to Portland is because they were requested by the Portland local commander.
You can listen to the entire conversation on OPB's website, which is opb.org. It's about 12 minutes long, and again, we think it's worth your time. Right now, Oregon lawmakers are in the middle of their second special session of the summer. In case you didn't notice, that was some grade A news anchoring. Once more, just so you know it's not a fluke. Their second special session of the summer. Sensational. They've been working on a bunch of police reform bills, but only one is actually on the table for this session. It expands on some of the use of force laws they passed last month. Officers will only be able to use a chokehold for self-defense or defending another person. Police would also have to give a verbal warning and a reasonable amount of time for a person to comply before they use physical or deadly force. So far, that bill has passed out of committee, but Republicans have spoken out against passing any non-budgetary bills this session. So we're going to have to see exactly where this one goes. Naturally, though, the bulk of the bills have to do with the budget. They didn't pass a budget earlier this year when they were supposed to, because Democrats tried to pass cap and trade, and Republicans didn't like that, so they walked out over it, and almost nothing got passed during that short session. But we're living in a whole different world right now, aren't we? The economy is in the tank because of the pandemic, and lawmakers need to fill a more than $1 billion hole. As you know, we don't have sales tax here in Oregon, so the state relies heavily, almost entirely, on income tax for revenues. But so many people are out of work right now that means that there's a lot less income tax coming in. Lawmakers are talking about making cuts then across the board for all state agencies and using money from an education rainy day fund so schools won't run out of funding. Now, as you can expect, Democrats and Republicans are butting heads a bit. Republicans just voted down a bill dealing with unemployment benefits, and on Twitter, Governor Kate Brown called that appalling. On the other hand, Republicans do seem to have an issue with the pace of this session. They don't like that they're not allowing public testimony, only written testimony, and they think things are going too fast.
I know that there are members across the building and people across the state that are scrambling to fully understand what's in these bills, and to have a very brief overview for staff that's not even an in-depth line-by-line review, and then no opportunity for public comment, I think is a mistake.
Democrats say they took public testimony a couple weeks ago. So far, most of the budget bills have passed out of committee, so things are moving along pretty quickly from our vantage point. The session is supposed to last through Wednesday. We'll keep you posted, of course. Now, our big story from Friday still has a lot of people talking. Last week, Kristen Severance reported that in Oregon, dying from COVID and dying with COVID is counted as the same thing. Today, she's focusing on Washington and why it no longer counts that way.
We got a ton of Hey Dan questions after my investigation Friday into how Oregon tracks and reports COVID-19 deaths. So in Oregon, no matter what you die from, if you have COVID-19, that is reported as a COVID-19 death. For example, alcohol poisoning, car crash, or a gunshot wound. If that person had COVID, it's marked as a COVID-19 death. Now, according to the state, they do this for several reasons, including to track the spread of the virus. A lot of you asked me on Twitter, how do other states track this information? Well, in Washington state, I learned they used to report the deaths like Oregon until the end of June, when they realized that some deaths were being counted that shouldn't have. So they changed their system to remove the deaths that were not caused by COVID, including 3 homicides, 2 suicides, and 2 overdose deaths. They told me they did this to be as accurate as possible, and they will continue to remove deaths that should not be listed as a COVID-19 death. Washington has nearly 1,700 deaths. Oregon has less than 400. Now, in Oregon, they have no plans to change what they're doing. They told me on Friday, they told me on Monday. The OHA spokesperson told me, quote, "In public health, we are looking at health data at the population level, so we must have a simple, objective approach to classifying deaths, and we follow national infectious disease reporting standards in doing so. We know that there may be the occasional misclassification, but we have chosen our definition to minimize this and come up with reliable numbers." Other states like Colorado also used to report COVID deaths the way Oregon does. But after public outrage, when a person who died of alcohol poisoning but was marked as a COVID-19 death, the state changed their system in one day. We will keep you posted on this story. You can watch the entire investigation right now on KGW.com or on Dan's Facebook page. And as always, if you have questions, if you have comments, let us know by using the hashtag HeyDan.
All right, real quick, we want to remind folks in Portland to vote. Don't forget there is a special election to fill an empty seat on Portland City Council. It's between these two people, former Multnomah County Commissioner Loretta Smith on the left and education nonprofit executive Dan Ryan on the right. They're running to take over for the late Nick Fish, who died in January after a battle with cancer. There are still 2 years left in his term, so whoever wins will finish his time. KGW has interviewed both of them several times. I had some time one-on-one with each one of them, and Laurel Porter hosted both of them on Straight Talk. And you can find all of our conversations on the KGW YouTube channel. Throughout today's show, we're also going to share some of Smith and Ryan's various policy standpoints to give you kind of a primer of what you want to do here. Ballots are due in the drop box by tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. You can find out where your nearest drop box is on the county's website, maltco.us/drop sites. and we will have results on kgw.com.
When the story continues, why science says we care more about 1,000s.
They're just numbers, like of 100,000, a million. We can't relate to those numbers.
And what it means for the fight against COVID-19.
A TV show that makes you read. We like to do it. We're showing you some of the facts about Loretta Smith and Dan Ryan. They're running to fill an empty seat on Portland City Council tomorrow rather. That is election day. So if you live in Portland, you have until 8 o'clock tomorrow night to turn in your ballot to a drop box. Don't put it in the mail, too late for that. Make sure you find a drop box. You can find out where on the Multnomah County website. Now, the locals might already know this, but this one's for the 112 of you who move here every day, or at least did before the pandemic. The Tip Top Tavern in Vancouver has quite a story. The owner claims they were the first spot in Washington to get a liquor license after Prohibition ended. So they've been around for a while, since 1933. But unfortunately, it took COVID-19 to bring them down.
I'm shutting down to save my business and to save my employees' jobs.
All right, that's the owner there, Janelle Shadley. She says because there's no room for human air and following the COVID-19 health rules, her liquor license was in jeopardy, so she's closing down, at least for the time being. I think it's worth spending some time now talking about the cost of this pandemic. In addition to the loss of many lives, it has cost a lot of livelihoods as well. And not just in the smallest small businesses, but the big ones too. Institutions like Pok Pok. We haven't talked about them in a while, but Pok Pok was one of those places that you took your friends who came to visit Portland from out of town, first timers, that sort of thing. It was up there with like Voodoo Donuts and Pals. Now most of their locations are just gone. Even at the uppermost echelon of fine dining, like a Michelin-starred New York City restaurant that regularly had lines around the corner and reservations weeks in advance, Eater reported that it's closing now. Now, if this virus can bring the biggest, most popular restaurants with the most money backing them to their knees, then local spots like the Tip Top Tavern never stood a chance. And it seems that their only hope at this point is a vaccine or another round of government assistance. And at the rate we're going, there's no telling which is going to come first. It is really easy, honestly, to care about, one thing, one closed restaurant, one lost puppy, one missing child, one COVID-19 death. But what happens when one becomes 160,000? What does that do to our brains? Our producer, Andrew Dorn, talked to a U of O psychology professor about psychic numbing.
Remember the story from 2002 of Hawkette, the dog lost at sea? Probably not, but what happened with Hawkette teaches us a lot about psychic numbing. In March of 2002, a fire broke out on an oil tanker 800 miles south of Hawaii. The boat and its crew drifted for over 2 weeks before a passing cruise ship rescued them. It was only after the tanker had been abandoned that the crew realized they were one short. The captain's dog had been left behind. Somewhere in the Pacific, a 2-year-old terrier floated alone on a big, derelict ship. The media picked up the story and word spread. Within days, thousands of dollars in donations poured in to fund rescue efforts for Hawkette. The Hawaiian Humane Society paid a private company $48,000 to look for the ship, but to no avail. Eventually, it was the U.S. Coast Guard who redirected taxpayer funds and hired a boat to recover the tanker and the dog on it. Now here's the science of why we care about one little dog, but maybe not all the dogs who might need help around the world. Research shows that we will go to great lengths to save one life, but we become indifferent when a story is about a big group of people, like the thousands of coronavirus deaths, or a disaster in a foreign country. Why is that?
The feeling system has kind of very limited range. It can't ramp up.
That's University of Oregon psychology professor Paul Slovic, who has spent his whole life studying why people do what they do and why they stop caring.
The difference between 0 people at risk and 1 is huge. But if I told you that there were 87 people in danger in some situation, and then I told you that there's 88, you won't feel any different.
In fact, not only does our concern plateau with additional lives at risk, but when the number becomes too big, our compassion might actually decrease. We care less when we should care more.
At some level, we may not feel anything. They're just numbers. Like if 100,000, 1 million, we can't relate to those numbers, and we lose feeling. We call it the compassion fade or compassion collapse.
In his 50 years of research, Slovic found something else that was startling about the way our brains work. We are less willing to help if we think what we're doing only helps a little.
If the need is great and our contribution is a small proportion, then we kind of get the feeling, well, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe it's a drop in the bucket.
Slovic ran an actual experiment that presented 2 groups the same picture of a little girl in need. The first group was provided a description of the girl. The second was shown the same picture, but with a description of the huge problem that affected her and millions of others. Slovic found people were willing to donate more money when told just the girl's story, and less, a lot less, to the one that described the bigger problem.
We call it pseudo-inefficacy. Pseudo because it's a false sense that we're not effective, when in fact we are doing something, albeit a small proportion.
So it's hardwired into how we think and emotionally react. That's why people begged the US Coast Guard to rescue Haquette the dog, but maybe didn't care that much about all the dogs in all the shelters around the world. It's psychic numbing, and it happens to all of us.
Very interesting. Professor Slovic told us that psychic numbing isn't necessarily a bad thing, and you probably understand why pretty simply. I mean, for example, think about nurses or people that deal with trauma, doctors every single day, surgeons. They need a certain amount of numbing to get through their day. Producer Andrew will have another story on psychic numbing tomorrow on KGW News at sunrise. If you want to wake up bright and early and check it out and learn a little bit more. So what a conversation starter. I think so. Let me know what you're thinking. Use that hashtag HeyDan. Email us at thestory@kgw.com. Right now is the perfect time because I'm going to read some comments when we finish the story. Next. This is just a perfect example of the emails that we get on a given night. This was talking about Maggie's story at the beginning. We were discussing protesters being arrested, people engaging in violence being arrested, and then some of the charges being dropped. Erica wrote in and said, the reporting about the protests lean too heavily on what police said, which have been proven to be exaggerated or false several different times. So she thinks we're too much in the favor of police. And then literally the very next text came in. This is from Freedom RRDD. Just checking in. Let's take a look. KGW justifying catch and release of rioters. Check. KGW making excuses for violence. Check. KGW minimizing arson. Check. Just because we are reporting what's going on does not mean we're endorsing it. So when we say what police are saying, that's what we're doing. When we're telling you what the district attorney is doing, that's what we're doing. We're simply telling you. We're not endorsing anything. I'll let you know when I'm endorsing something. Like the story. Keep watching. We'll see you tomorrow.